The operator could hear the panic in her voice. A woman was screaming on the phone, saying her boyfriend had been stabbed. In the background, there was chaos. A man was struggling to breathe, blood spreading across the floor of a luxury apartment in Miami. Police and paramedics rushed to the scene, but by the time they arrived, the damage had already been done. The man lying on the floor was 27-year-old Christian Toby Obumseli, and the woman who made the call was his girlfriend, a social media influencer known to millions of followers online, Courtney Clenney. She told police it was self-defense, but as investigators began piecing together what happened inside that Miami apartment, disturbing details began to emerge. Because just weeks before the killing, security cameras had captured something that would change how many people viewed this case. And it raised a question investigators still haven't fully answered. What really happened inside that apartment on April 3rd, 2022?
Wait, is he dead? Is he dead?
Sit down.
Sit down.
Okay, no, I'll sit down. I just, you scared me.
Sit down.
He's not dead, is he?
We don't.
No, they're taking him to the hospital right now.
He's in the hospital right now.
I need to be at the hospital with him.
You're not going anywhere.
Why?
Because we're conducting an investigation.
It was I was self-defense. I mean, my mom was on the phone.
Okay, well, listen, the detectives are coming, you're gonna talk to them, and then you're gonna explain your side.
But I'm gonna be covered in blood. I look crazy. I was holding him while he was spurting blood, trying to stop the blood.
Okay, so you guys started arguing, then what happened?
Threw me against the wall, choked me. I mean, you're looking like this. He's never like choked me to where like it's like crazy stuff. But like, I mean, I couldn't breathe.
Okay.
Then he put me on the.
So he
on the
throws you
ground.
against the wall?
Then he put me on the ground, choked me. That's happened 2 other times.
Did he
before.
tell you anything? Did he say
just
anything?
like that kind of face, like where I was really scared and I was trying to get him off. I mean, he wouldn't
Okay.
get off. Then he gets off. Then I called my mom.
Okay.
And then I was like, I went into the other room and I was talking to her and I was like crying and saying like something has happened, like I don't know what's going on with Christian. And I was just like crying, whatever. And then like I went to the kitchen and he started like charging at me. And I said like, I'm gonna like throw this at you. And he goes, do it. And then he charged me and I threw, but he was far away and I never in a million years, like even, like I'm
He threw
scared.
a statue at you?
No. It was the knife. I said, like, I was just holding it to be like, please don't come anywhere near me.
Welcome to Dark Minds. In today's case, we're examining the mysterious and controversial death of Christian Obumseli and the woman accused of killing him, Courtney Clenney. Before we dive into the story, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more deep dive true crime documentaries and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. Their story began in Austin, Texas in 2020. 2 young lives, each with ambition and drive, found themselves drawn together by chance, by circumstance, and perhaps by the illusion of connection that social media can create. Courtney Clenney, 24 at the time, was already making a name for herself online. Her Instagram account was filled with carefully curated images, snapshots of a life that seemed glamorous, exciting, and enviable. She was known to her followers as Courtney Taylor, a name that had come to represent a persona of confidence, allure, and success. Her popularity on the platform was growing quickly, and she had recently started sharing content on OnlyFans, where she connected with a much larger, devoted audience. Christian Obumseli, a 27-year-old Nigerian-American, pursuing a career in cryptocurrency trading. Ambitious, meticulous, and private, he balanced the intensity of his work with a desire for connection in his personal life. Friends and acquaintances described him as kind, focused, and supportive, someone who carried a sense of responsibility and stability with him in all areas of his life. When they met, there was an undeniable spark. Friends and acquaintances noticed the chemistry immediately, the way they laughed together, the way they seemed to understand each other's moods without words, and the way social media suddenly became a stage for their shared experiences. Photos and videos posted online painted a picture of a passionate, loving relationship. Late-night dinners, weekend getaways, and carefully staged selfies that suggested perfection. But as their online personas intertwined, the line between reality and performance began to blur. What looked perfect to the world often hid tensions beneath the surface. The relationship, which at first seemed full of excitement and connection, began to reveal its cracks. Arguments that once ended in tears or apologies now escalated to threats and intimidation. Patterns of jealousy and possessiveness began to emerge, along with the sense that small disagreements could erupt into dangerous confrontations. For Courtney, the arrest was a wake-up call, though the consequences were temporary. For Christian, it was the first hint that his private life was becoming a powder keg. The incident in Las Vegas planted seeds of fear, mistrust, and unresolved tension that neither of them could easily escape. And yet, life went on. The couple returned to their routines, moved between cities, and continued cultivating their public image online. But beneath the smiling photos and carefully staged social media posts, the first fractures had formed. Fractures that would over the following year widen into conflicts far more serious, setting the stage for the tragic events that would unfold in Miami. This was not just an argument, it was the beginning of a pattern. And in the quiet moments that followed, after the officers had left and the lights of Las Vegas faded behind them, a dangerous truth lingered between them. Passion and obsession had begun to collide, and the first warning sign of violence was no longer something that could be ignored. By the start of 2022, Courtney and Christian's relationship had already weathered its first serious storm, yet the couple appeared undeterred. In January, they made a major decision, one that would set the stage for the next chapter of their lives, and unknowingly, the events that would ultimately end in tragedy. They made the move from the familiarity of Austin and the fleeting chaos of Las Vegas to Edgewater, a trendy neighborhood in Miami, Florida. The move was framed as an exciting new chapter. Miami offered luxury high-rise living, a vibrant social scene, and opportunities to expand Courtney's growing online brand. The couple settled into a luxury apartment in a prominent high-rise building with sweeping views of the city in the Bay. To outsiders, it was the life of success and ambition, filled with glamour, travel, and influence. But behind closed doors, the tension that had begun in previous cities would quietly follow them to their new home.
The apartment itself, meant to be a safe haven, quickly became a pressure cooker. Neighbors would later report hearing loud arguments echoing through the hallways, objects being thrown, and the occasional scream piercing the quiet of the building's evening hours. These were not isolated incidents. Over time, the frequency and intensity of the fights increased, often coinciding with nights when Courtney had posted new content online or Christian had returned home after long hours at work. In public, the couple continued to portray an image of perfection. Courtney's social media feed remained filled with carefully curated images, late-night dinners, glamorous selfies, and posts that suggested a loving, passionate relationship. Christian, private and reserved, rarely appeared in the photos, yet the captions suggested closeness, trust, and commitment. Their followers, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, saw nothing amiss. But private messages, text exchanges, and phone records later revealed a different story. Jealousy flared over minor interactions, accusations surfaced over social media comments, and arguments often escalated into shouting matches. Even in a luxury apartment, a space meant for comfort, the couple could not escape the cycle of tension that had begun months earlier. The move to Miami also marked a turning point in the psychological dynamic of the relationship. Being in a new city with fewer familiar faces left both Courtney and Christian isolated in ways they hadn't experienced before. Their reliance on one another intensified, as did the pressure to maintain appearances online. What began as mutual ambition gradually morphed into control, manipulation, and the quiet erosion of trust.
Friends who remained in contact noticed subtle changes. Christian, once composed and thoughtful, was increasingly wary of Courtney's moods. Courtney, who thrived on attention and affirmation, became increasingly volatile when she perceived slights or challenges to her authority. Arguments that had once been brief or contained now bled into hours, leaving emotional scars that neither spoke of publicly. This period in Miami laid the groundwork for what was to come. The environment, the stress of relocation, and the unspoken tension between their public and private lives created a perfect storm. It was in this high-rise apartment, amid the city's glimmering skyline, that the relationship would reach the point of no return, a climax neither of them could have predicted. The move to Miami was more than a change of scenery. It was a shift in the relationship's trajectory, a catalyst that would amplify the volatile mix of passion, obsession, and latent aggression. And as the months passed, each argument, each misunderstanding, and each unspoken grievance would quietly build toward the fateful day in April, a day that would shock the world and leave a trail of questions still unanswered. By February of 2022, Courtney and Christian had settled into their luxury apartment in Miami, but the veneer of a glamorous, exciting life was starting to crack. The arguments that had quietly escalated in Austin and Las Vegas were no longer confined to private spaces. Their tension began to spill into the very environment they shared, the building itself, the hallways, and most notably, the elevator. Security cameras in the One Paraiso building captured a shocking incident that would later circulate widely, drawing attention from friends, neighbors, and eventually the media. In the footage, Christian appears calm, standing quietly, while Courtney aggressively confronts him. The argument escalates quickly. She shoves him, strikes him multiple times, and even kicks him while he tries to retreat. What makes the footage so compelling and disturbing is the contrast between their public personas and private reality. Online, Courtney maintained her confident, glamorous image. To her followers, she was the polished influencer, a young woman with ambition, charm, and millions of fans. Christian, meanwhile, remained largely absent from social media, the quiet, supportive figure in her story. But the elevator video revealed a different truth. This relationship was no longer just passionate, it was volatile, unpredictable, and at times physically aggressive. For the first time, the tension was captured in a way that was undeniable. Friends who later saw the video said it changed everything. It forced them to reconcile the online romance they had admired with a far more troubling reality. At the time, the couple managed to keep the incident from escalating further. No arrests were made, no police reports filed, but the elevator confrontation left a lasting impression. It was a moment that foreshadowed the deeper conflicts that would come, a warning sign that their relationship had crossed a dangerous threshold. Observers could see the patterns forming. Arguments that once ended in apologies now escalated into physical confrontations, and the sense of control and imbalance between the two partners was becoming more pronounced. This was not a one-time outburst. It was a glimpse into the underlying volatility that had been building for months, now captured in a stark, undeniable way. The elevator video also marked the beginning of public scrutiny. Though the footage was initially confined to building security, it eventually leaked, drawing attention from social media and the press. Fans and strangers alike began to question what was happening behind the glossy photos and curated posts. The online image of a perfect, glamorous relationship was rapidly unraveling. By the end of February 2022, it was clear that Courtney and Christian's relationship had entered a dangerous phase. The elevator incident was more than just a fight. It was a harbinger, a glimpse of what would eventually culminate in tragedy. It was a warning that the stakes were escalating, that emotions were intensifying, and that the boundaries of safety and trust were irreversibly breached. And as they continued to navigate their lives in Miami, the tension quietly simmered. Neither could predict how quickly events would spiral, nor how the world would come to know the dark reality of the relationship they had tried so hard to present as perfect. By March of 2022, the relationship between Courtney and Christian had shifted from passionate to perilous. The move to Miami, the elevator incident, in months of escalating tension had left both partners emotionally drained, yet strangely intertwined. Friends noticed a pattern: brief moments of tenderness followed by long stretches of conflict, often spiraling into arguments that lasted for hours. Christian, who had always been private and measured, began to show signs of frustration and wariness. His once composed demeanor gave way to irritation, sharp words, and moments of visible fear. Courtney, on the other hand, seemed increasingly volatile. Friends described her as unpredictable, swinging from calm and affectionate to angry and accusatory with little warning. Social media posts no longer reflected the reality behind the apartment walls. While followers saw glamorous outings and smiling photos, the private reality was tense and fraught with emotional turbulence. During this time, the couple began discussing separation. They argued over finances, property, and the control of shared space. Their disagreements, though sometimes trivial, escalated quickly. A disagreement over the placement of furniture, the tone of a text message, or perceived slights online could erupt into shouting matches that left both emotionally wounded. Neighbors recalled nights filled with yelling, banging sounds, and occasional furniture being thrown. One even heard objects shatter and the unmistakable sound of anger filling the apartment hallways. The building, once a neutral backdrop for their new life, had become a silent witness to their ongoing conflict. Attempts to reconciliation were temporary and superficial. The couple would apologize, embrace, and then retreat into periods of cold silence, each silently counting the next transgression, the next insult, the next perceived betrayal. Isolation in the luxury apartment only intensified the psychological pressure. Friends noticed that Christian had started to avoid social gatherings, while Courtney increasingly immersed herself in her online persona, using her content as a shield and distraction from the growing instability in her personal life. By the end of March, it was clear to those close to the couple that their relationship was unraveling. What had begun as a passionate connection had transformed into a complex web of fear, obsession, and mistrust. Both partners were caught in a cycle they could not easily escape, bound together by emotional attachment, dependence, and the public scrutiny of millions of followers who knew nothing of the private turmoil. And while the couple appeared to the outside world as successful, glamorous, and enviable, the reality was far darker. Arguments that had once been manageable were now escalating with alarming speed, creating an atmosphere of tension that was impossible to ignore. The stage was set. By the time April arrived, the simmering conflict would boil over, leading to events that would shock friends, family, and the public alike. April 3, 2022 began like any other day in the luxurious high-rise apartment overlooking Miami skyline. Yet beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. The previous weekend's arguments had left both Courtney and Christian tense, wary, and emotionally frayed. Friends later described the atmosphere in their private messages and calls as heavy, filled with unease and unresolved anger. Around 1:15 p.m., Christian left the apartment to walk the couple's dogs. By all appearances, it was a routine errand, an attempt to step away from the mounting tension and clear his mind. But in the confined space of the apartment, the silence left behind was far from peaceful. Courtney remained inside, the weight of the relationship's turmoil pressing down with every passing minute. By approximately 4:35 p.m., Christian returned to the apartment carrying a few Subway sandwiches. What should have been a simple, ordinary moment quickly escalated. Neighbors later reported hearing raised voices from within the unit, though the specifics were unclear. The argument, months in the making, flared again, fueled by frustration, fear, jealousy, and emotional exhaustion. Courtney, who had long struggled to maintain her composed public persona while managing private volatility, became increasingly agitated. Christian, aware of the growing intensity, tried to navigate the confrontation cautiously. Every word, every gesture carried weight, each action potentially tipping the balance toward conflict or disaster. During this time, Courtney reportedly made multiple phone calls to her mother. The first call came around 4:43 p.m., the second around 4:49 p.m. According to her mother, she heard shouting, commands, and what sounded like urgent attempts to defuse the situation. The desperation in Courtney's voice suggested fear, confusion, and panic, a stark contrast to the confidence she projected online. Minutes later, the situation reached its breaking point. The argument turned physical, and in a moment that would later define the case, Christian suffered a fatal stab wound to the chest. Paramedics arrived shortly after 5 p.m., but despite their efforts, Christian would not survive. The scene inside the apartment was chaotic. Blood covered the floor. Furniture and objects were displaced in the struggle. Courtney remained on site, making the 911 call that would instantly broadcast her version of events to the world, a claim of self-defense, a plea for help, and the beginning of a narrative that would divide public opinion for years to come. This day, April 3, 2022, would forever mark the intersection of passion, obsession, and tragedy. A relationship that had begun with excitement, promise, and the allure of social media fame had ended in violence, leaving unanswered questions, shocked friends, and a community grappling with the shocking reality behind the images they had seen online. As investigators began piecing together what happened in those final hours, every call, every argument, every prior incident from Las Vegas to Miami suddenly gained significance. Each moment was a thread in a larger, tragic tapestry, one that would capture public attention and raise questions that remain unanswered to this day. Neighbors and first responders would later describe the scene as a mix of panic, confusion, and lingering fear. For those outside, it was a shocking glimpse into a life that had seemed glamorous online, but had been steeped in tension behind closed doors. The fatal incident marked the irreversible turning point in the relationship, turning months of escalating conflict into a tragedy that would dominate headlines for years to come. The key question for investigators became whether Courtney had acted in self-defense or whether the stabbing was an intentional act of violence. Courtney claimed she had acted out of fear for her life. According to her account, the struggle had escalated and she had no other option but to defend herself. The medical examiner's report, however, raised questions. The trajectory of the wound suggested a direct downward stab, inconsistent with the idea of a knife being thrown or a panicked defensive strike. Every piece of evidence, from prior arguments, domestic incidents, and the surveillance footage, became part of a complex puzzle that investigators had to untangle. For the public, the case became polarizing. Social media erupted with debates over self-defense, past relationship dynamics, and who was to blame. Each new detail heightened the suspense and fueled a growing fascination with a case that seemed equal parts tragedy and controversy. For months following the fatal incident, Courtney remained free from arrest. This delay sparked outrage online. Many wondered why someone directly involved in a fatal stabbing had not been immediately taken into custody. Legal experts explained the initial hesitation. Authorities were conducting a thorough investigation, gathering evidence, and analyzing prior domestic incidents. This period also allowed both defense and prosecution teams to assemble narratives and review the extensive documentation, phone calls, neighbor statements, surveillance footage, and social media activity. During this time, Courtney's public image remained under scrutiny. Followers questioned the story, while the media dissected every previous incident for signs that would support one version of events over another. The tension, uncertainty, and public fascination only heightened the stakes for the eventual trial. Courtney Clenney was arrested on the Big Island of Hawaii, where she had been staying at a rehabilitation facility. She was charged with second-degree murder with a deadly weapon. Her extradition to Miami-Dade County marked the formal beginning of a legal battle that would capture national attention. Questions about self-defense, prior incidents, and psychological dynamics were now under the microscope. Every detail from past months and years would be re-examined as prosecutors and defense attorneys prepared to make their case. The trial process quickly became complex and contentious. Lawyers on both sides presented vastly different narratives. The prosecution emphasized Courtney's prior history of aggression, including the Las Vegas domestic battery arrest and the elevator incident in Miami. They argued that the fatal stabbing was the culmination of a pattern of escalating violence. The defense painted a different picture. They highlighted the fear and psychological stress Courtney had experienced over months of volatility, portraying her actions as a desperate attempt to protect herself from an abusive partner. Court proceedings were punctuated by motions, disputes over evidence, and public scrutiny. Every new revelation fueled media coverage and public debate.
As the case progressed, several controversies emerged over the handling of evidence. Court rulings restricted the use of certain private recordings from Christian, while allowing public surveillance footage to be admitted. Courtney's parents were briefly involved in legal matters related to accessing Christian's laptop, though charges against them were later dismissed. These legal twists added layers of complexity to an already high-profile case. Every ruling, delay, and procedural maneuver became part of a narrative watched closely by followers, true crime enthusiasts, and national media outlets. In a dramatic turn, the lead prosecutor in the case withdrew from the trial, citing concerns over prior communications and potential conflicts. This unexpected development delayed proceedings and added further uncertainty to a case already fraught with suspense. Observers noted that every delay, every ruling, and every procedural detail heightened anticipation for the trial, keeping public attention focused on Courtney Clenney and the circumstances surrounding Christian Obumseli's death. As of now, Courtney Clenney remains in custody without bond. The trial is scheduled to begin in late April 2026. The court will determine whether the fatal stabbing was an act of self-defense or whether it constituted murder. The courtroom will serve as the final stage for the months and years of tension, conflict, and tragedy that have defined their story. Every witness, piece of evidence, and prior incident will be examined under the scrutiny of law, media, and public opinion. The truth, in many ways, remains elusive. Christian Obumseli's life was cut tragically short. Courtney Clenney's future rests in the hands of a jury tasked with untangling a web of love, fear, violence, and desperation. As the trial unfolds, the story continues to captivate, disturb, and provoke reflection. It is a reminder that relationships, when unchecked and fueled by obsession and volatility, can spiral into irreversible tragedy, and that every small choice, every heated word, and every moment of fear can have consequences far beyond what anyone could anticipate. If you want to stay updated on this case and explore more gripping true crime stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to The Dark Minds. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your perspective matters, and your voice could spark the next conversation about justice, truth, and the stories that unfold behind closed doors. For now, we leave you with this question. In relationships, when does love cross the line into danger, and could it happen to anyone?